So it's been a while since I've completed the Invincible series in its entirety, and I had it down in my notes to revisit this series because I knew from my initial feeling from reading the comics that I had a lot to say about Invincible. More importantly, a specific character who I'm dedicating an entire video to, Mark Grayson. And the main thing that I have to say about this kid is that I don't like him. In both the shows and the comics, Mark Grayson has fallen so short for me as a character that it just genuinely would make me mad every time I saw him on screen. The writers of Invincible wrote Mark Grayson's story arc to be so honest and violent, all the way to the point where we get to the end of Invincible, where it comes off as more compelling, borderline even genius. And it's because of that duality that I decided to make this video. Hi, my name is Mercy Unscripted and welcome to the channel. If you are new here, please hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so that way you get all the notifications for whenever I drop a video. And without further ado, let's get into the character analysis. I think the very first thing that I realized about Invincible when I first got into the series is that this kid really didn't have any goals. He lacked the ambition to want something for himself. And compared to other teenage heroes that we see in entertainment, such as, let's say, Naruto or Deku, Naruto wanting to be the Hokage of his village and Deku wanting to be the #1 hero kind of thing, he definitely falls short in that aspect. You know what, it doesn't even feel right to compare him to anime and manga characters because I feel like Invincible doesn't even fit itself into that genre at all. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna compare him to something that is a little bit more American, something that's honed into just the comic side and not so much manga. And we're gonna go into the DC universe and take a look at Superboy, specifically the Young Justice Superboy. Now, the reason that I'm choosing Superboy from Young Justice is because he is the closest thing to Mark that there is in the DC universe, especially I think him and Superman follow those same power sets, but not only that, he has a similar relationship type as far as mentors and role models go. Superboy was born in a lab by xenomorphs spliced together by Lex Luthor and Superman's DNA. Upon his release, Superboy wanted nothing more than to be just like Superman. Honorable, kind, empathetic, and inspiring, Superman was all of these things plus the strength to protect his planet. But right out the gate, Superboy had flaws, and it didn't help that when they first met, Superman rejected his very existence. Now, over time, they reconciled and Superman learned to accept Connor for what he actually is and not what he was meant to be, which allowed them to foster a great relationship as brothers and allowed Superman to mentor Connor onto the right path. Now, let's contrast this over to Invincible. Mark started out having a great role model. Growing up, he wanted nothing more to be like his dad, Omni-Man, this great, strong, honorable man who was leading the team of the Guardians of the Globe. But all of those dreams were shattered when Omni-Man didn't turn out to be the man that he claimed he was. Now, to have your role model, the man that you idolized your entire life, let alone your father, come out to the world as being evil and call your mom a pet, that genuinely would alter your brain chemistry. Mark lost his father very early on in this story, and I believe that contributed to a lot of the problems that he had throughout the beginning stages of Invincible. And as it should, it makes sense. Your daddy's gone. A lot of those problems kind of hinged on him. You just found out you have superpowers and your mentor slash father, the man that you looked up to, is gone out of your life. You want nothing to do with him. He's evil. But I feel like that gave Mark a very good moral compass in the way that he never wants to end up like his father. And that brings me to the first thing I want to talk about with Mark, and that is that he lacks conviction. The writers put this kid through a lot. He is a Viltrumite human hero and a teenager on top of all of that. He constantly struggles to find the right thing to do. He wants to do the right thing, but he just doesn't know what that is yet. And he avoids so much confrontation with the hard truths. And I think that's what irked me at the beginning of Invincible, is that he struggled with accepting the truth that his father's a mass murderer, or the morality of killing, that sometimes villains do need to be killed, not stopped, but killed, so that they don't repeat their heinous acts again. And I feel like everyone knows from our past experiences with other crime-fighting superheroes, Daredevil, Spider-Man, we all know that leading a double life, having personal and hero relationships, your personal life is always going to suffer when you have a secret identity. And that's something that Mark really hasn't learned how to navigate yet. Don't get me wrong, these aren't flaws in writing, they're intentional. They show how Mark is still forming his moral moral compass. There was a scene in season 2, episode 1, where Mark tells Cecil that he wants to help again, but can't exactly explain why, just that he needs to. That kind of thinking was driven by guilt from what Omni-Man did to the world, and it's not driven by purpose. He doesn't know what he stands for, only that he's afraid of what he's going to become if he doesn't. He's still grasping at his interpersonal relationships and sitting on the fence about what he should be doing. And in the world of heroing, indecisiveness and hesitation will genuinely get people killed. And I think that's why it was so hard for me to watch Mark in the early days, because he could never quite figure it out when the answer was always just staring right in front of him. The next character trait I want to talk about with Mark is his naivety, and the writers did an annoyingly good job at giving Mark the idealistic mindset of a teenage hero. He believes that being a hero and doing the right thing is so simple and thinks that everyone is mostly good, when that kind of just leads a cascade of consequences for Mark throughout the story. This leads Mark to being extremely gullible and easily manipulated. Not to mention it ruins his personal relationships too. Throughout season 1, Mark lies to Amber a lot. He assumes that his superhero status justifies his dishonesty, not understanding that emotional trust is just as important as saving lives. And I think that we all know from other past superheroes that we've watched throughout the years, being honest with your romantic partner if you're serious about them is probably the best way to go about it. It's still gonna suck, but it's better than lying to them constantly. In season 2, Mark believes that if he just saves more people and does more good around the city, that people will start to forgive what his father did to the Guardians of the Globe. However, he greatly underestimates how much trauma and how much impact that had on the world. And he's shocked by how much fear and anger and distrust is still surrounding him. Even when he was on Thraxa with his father, Mark tries to protect both the locals and appease the Viltrumites. He believes that he could balance the impossible, negotiate, fight, and minimize the harm to the native people. And Mark just won't accept that you have to pick a side sometimes, and trying to keep everyone happy can lead to even worse outcomes. This isn't just a flaw in Mark's character. This is a core part of his coming of age story arc. The writers knew this, and even though it was hard, so hard to watch, I had to keep reminding myself that Mark is only 17 years old. And when given that context, it all makes sense. Now let's move on to something else that also kind of pissed me off about Mark's character. If you ever found yourself reading or watching Invincible and you just thought to yourself, why isn't Mark stronger? Well, you're not alone, because I did as well, and it so gravely burned my inner soul. Now, I'm not talking about Mark's strength inherently, I'm talking about his determination to get stronger specifically, because I feel like Mark's words doesn't match his determination. Mark's one goal throughout this story, other than not ending up like his father, was to protect Earth. That's all he wanted to do, was to protect mankind. He always said it, he said, I'm going to protect mankind, the ones that I love. However, he still ended up scraping by every single fight, and I feel like he just wasn't locked in enough. He did not try hard enough to back up that determination, to back up any of those claims that he wanted to do. He just had those dreams of aspirations with no work put behind them. And I'm not gonna negate any of the training that he did do. This show, even in the comics, they gave us maybe 2 training montages. It's from what I can remember, about 2 training montages. We didn't need training montages, okay? Whatever the fuck he did with Cecil. We needed training arcs for Mark. Mark needed a training arc, like a full-on training arc. And what I'm not even looking for new abilities or anything. This isn't even really a jab at Mark. This is actually a jab at the writers, because I feel like they could have did more for his character to even make him more stand out against other Viltrumites. The only thing I think I'm looking for is just maybe some technique. If Mark had a mentor or someone else that could easily just teach him martial arts, it would have easily put him over a lot of the other Viltrumites if he learned a lot more technique, or at least put them up to par to where he'd be able to go 1v1 with Anissa and wouldn't have no problem, or 1v1 with Conquest. and still might have given him more of a challenge. I feel like the type of training that Mark did was so insufficient to what was needed for these kind of fights. It's like he just went into a boss fight so underleveled every single time and just barely scraped by with his life. And this brings me to another point that I want to talk about Mark. And again, this isn't even really a jab at him as a character, it's more so a jab at the writers, and that is that the writers deprived Mark of good mentorship. Throughout the series, Mark has had a handful of mentors and none of them really were that good. His very first one being Omni-Man, his father, which we all know how that turned out. It wasn't that good. It was bad and left him with so much trauma and scars and stuff. He just wasn't really a good role model or mentor at all. His second one being Cecil, which arguably is a good and bad mentor. I feel like he's not a good mentor, but he was a necessary evil that Mark definitely had to experience. If Mark didn't experience Cecil, if you take Cecil out of the story, it would change Mark's character a lot. It would change a lot of the story and everything. So it doesn't really matter if he was a good mentor. Mark still needed Cecil in some shape or form. Another mentor could be Alan, but I personally see Alan more as a ally other than a mentor, so I don't really count him. And some may agree that Dinosaurus later on in the comics sort of became Mark's mentor in a way for a short period of time before things went really bad and downhill. But other than that, Mark genuinely just didn't have that many good mentors. And in my opinion, all of the mentors that he did have were not equipped well enough to train Mark or to put him on the right path. Like, the best one out of all of those really that did any good for Mark's character was Cecil. And Cecil was like a necessary evil that just showed Mark what he needed to be, what he shouldn't be, and like just how to operate. He's like the leading raw example of what real life looks like. But had the writers given Mark a more traditional training arc and gave him a proper mentor to discipline him and give him the technique and martial arts training that he would have needed, Mark would have been profoundly better equipped to handle any threat that crossed his path. He would have protected his loved ones so much better. Angstrom Levy would have never laid a hand on Debbie. Oliver and Eve may have survived conquest with less injuries. And maybe when Thrag and his children pulled up to his doorstep, he could have protected his family better. That's just my opinion though. I can understand why they went a more realistic approach rather than traditional when it came to Mark's training. It was very subtle, but Mark still developed into a character that learned through pain and the suffering and failure and the responsibilities of life just by having it beat into him rather than it being taught. And I think that's a part of Mark that makes him special. It's part of him that makes him stand out amongst all of the other Viltrumites. And this is the part of Mark's character that I actually love so well, that the writers wrote so good, and that is Mark's emotional depth. Mark endures an insane amount of pain and trauma throughout this story. Betrayal by his father, watching his friends die, constant near-death experience, global rejection by the whole population of Earth post Omni-Man. He goes through all of this stuff and even more throughout the comics, yet he still has compassion and empathy for those around him. But contrastly is also at the same time learning that not every being deserves that compassion, such as villains that need to be put down. There's a part in the story that I kind of wanted to talk about that's super heavy and super important to Mark's arc as a character, and that would be the Anissa moment. Now, this part of Mark's story had so much emotional gravity to it that I feel like wasn't ever truly explored to the point that it should be. This dark moment for his character marks a shift in his maturity, empathy, and understanding of what strength really means. And even though it wasn't heavily discussed after it took place, I still believe it impacted Mark's character visibly and in subtle ways that marks a shift in his maturity and understanding of what strength really means. It forces him to confront what it feels like to feel powerless, even as a superhero. He understands vulnerability deeper now and is a lot more quieter and introspective when it comes to him voicing his emotions. But the writers don't let this define him. Instead of becoming a cold and cruel character, Mark continues to choose love and compassion, which all the more makes him even more heroic. Mark is special just as himself. Just him being a half human, half Viltrumite just makes him special on its own, because of that half of him that is human, that human brain that's inside of his head is his secret weapon against the Viltrumites. Without that human part of him, he would have never been able to sway Omni-Man. He would not have been able to later on convince the Viltrumites to stay on Earth. He brings empathy into a brutal and violent universe, and people follow him for it. Through the later half of this story, like the coalition arc of this story, the writers have changed Mark drastically, and he is essentially became a whole new character. He's became someone that's a lot more competent, who's a lot more experienced through failure, through pain, and that he just knows what's right. Mark Grayson has become so special just because he proves that you don't need to be perfect to be heroic, just unwilling to give up on what's right, even if it doesn't look pretty. The first example I have of this was when Mark actually killed Rex to reclaim the Earth and put it back into the hands of the people. While reading that scene, I realized how much Mark has grown, how much more competent he has become, because that is no easy decision to make, yet he displayed so much unwavering conviction to do what is right, and then has the humility to admit that what Rex was doing for planet Earth actually wasn't a bad thing. It's just that Rex could not be the one to do it. And not only did he not give himself the crown ruler of Earth, he gave it to someone with a lot more experience and knowledge to ensure they do the right thing. Another example that shows Mark's growth comes at the very end after the Coalition Viltrumite War. Mark has a conversation with Alan where he tells him that he is going to lead the Viltrumite Empire. Not to rule it, but to change it. And I feel like that's a clear reflection of how far his character has come. This marks the culmination of everything that he's learned about power, identity, and responsibility all throughout the series. He went from being a reactive teen at the beginning of the story to now a visionary leader by the end of it. He's reclaiming his Viltrumite heritage on his own terms and redefining it. Above all else, he is choosing the harder path. Killing Thrag was hard. Reforming an entire empire of warriors bred for domination, that's infinitely harder. Yet Mark chooses that path, showing that he's not after the glory, but progress instead. He's not just saving people, he's changing the system that created the threat in the first place. And he's doing it well. There was a point towards the end of the comics where Alan and Mark had to have a meeting, and that's when Alan was basically telling him that, hey, you and the Viltrumites are doing such a good job, too good of a job at protecting the universe, there's no use for us as the coalition of planets. And then a small little war fight kind of happens, and the Viltrumites obviously end up winning, but Alan asks, laying there in the rubble, you're really going to change everything, aren't you? And Mark says, if it makes the galaxy a safer place, then yes, I am. Essentially telling him that the coalition of planets does not need to exist anymore. Mark says that if the Viltrumites are doing such a good job at protecting the universe, then let it die. And that was the moment that I genuinely realized that this is not the same Mark anymore. This is not the same kid who was naive and gullible, easily manipulated, the one that rushes into a fight, the one that doesn't know how to control his emotions, the one that wasn't just making up shit as they go. This is a different, completely different guy. Mark's character arc is about him evolving from hesitation to conviction. He begins as a kid trying to figure out who he should be and grows into someone willing to fight for what he believes in, even if he has to stand alone. The writers did such a good job writing him at the end of the story, and I think that's why I had so much confliction in me when it came to Mark as a character. because despite me hating the decisions that he made or him just purely acting out of emotion all of the time, he is still a very well-written character. And I think that both can coexist simultaneously. And that's gonna be everything I have on Invincible for this video. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I just did an entire video researching all about how well this character is written, and I still don't like him. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it actually is that's bugging me about Mark. I just genuinely don't like him, but he is a well-written character, a very well-written character. If you guys want more Invincible content, please hit the subscribe and like button, and also leave a comment down below. What do you guys think of Mark Grayson as a character? Let's chop it up in the comments. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.